Mercy Dalton's hands hadn't stopped bleeding in 3 days. The lie from the wash bucket had eaten through skin that was already cracked and torn from 19 years of hard labor. She was 19 years old, but her reflection in the dirty window showed someone much older, someone whose eyes had learned to go empty when the pain came, someone who'd forgotten what hope felt like. Summer in Gravel Bend, Wyoming territory, felt like punishment from an angry god. The year was 1882, and the silver rush that had promised prosperity had instead turned the town into a den of desperate souls, chasing dreams that would never materialize. The mines were playing out, the ore running thin, and the town was dying slowly, like a patient bleeding out from a wound no one could see. Mercy lived in what couldn't honestly be called a home. Just 4 walls held together by spite and rotting wood at the town's forgotten edge, where Bone Creek Road petered out into sagebrush and dust. The floorboards beneath her were still damp from where she'd scrubbed them twice already that morning. It wouldn't matter. Nothing was ever clean enough for Ruth Dalton. Nothing was ever good enough, fast enough, perfect enough. The standard kept moving, kept rising, kept becoming more impossible to reach. That familiar creak behind her made every muscle in Mercy's body go rigid. The rocking chair. Always that cursed rocking chair, back and forth, marking time like a countdown to violence. She'd learned to read the rhythm. Slow meant Ruth was thinking about what punishment to deliver. Fast meant she'd already decided. "You think that floor's clean?" The voice was thick with cheap gin, each word slurred and dangerous. Ruth had been drinking since sunrise, which meant this was going to be a bad day. Maybe the worst kind of day. Mercy kept her eyes down, fixed on the wet floorboards, on her raw and bleeding knuckles. Experience had taught her that looking up, meeting Ruth's eyes, only made things worse. "Yes, Mama. I scrubbed it proper. Twice over." Ruth Dalton rose from her chair like a vulture sensing carrion, all sharp angles and predatory intent. She was skeletal, her face nothing but harsh angles, and yellowed skin stretched tight over bone. Her breath was poisonous, a mixture of gin and decay, and something darker. At 42, she looked 70. Bitterness had hollowed her out from the inside, eaten away everything soft or human or kind, leaving only rage and resentment in its wake. Proper? Ruth's boot connected with the wash bucket, sending gray water flooding across the freshly cleaned boards, erasing an hour of work in one vicious kick. "That's proper. You useless, worthless wretch. You're just like him, your worthless father. May he rot deeper than the mine shaft that took him. Lazy, stupid, a waste of air." Mercy's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding together to keep from screaming. Her father, Thomas Dalton, had died in the cave-in of 79, crushed under 1,000 tons of rock when the number 3 tunnel collapsed. She'd been 16. Ruth had blamed her then, too, somehow. Blamed her for his death, for the poverty, for the loneliness, for the slow death of every hope Ruth had ever harbored. Ruth blamed her for everything, for existing, for breathing, for surviving when better people had died. "Get yourself down to Whitmore's trading post," Ruth hissed, grabbing a fistful of Mercy's hair and yanking her head back until their faces were inches apart. Mercy could smell the rot on her mother's breath, could see the madness dancing in her yellowed eyes. "Old man Whitmore says he needs help with his stockroom. Don't you dare come back without $2, or I swear, on your father's grave, I'll make you wish you died with him. You hear me, girl?" Mercy stumbled toward the door, her scalp burning where hair had been torn loose. The screen door slammed behind her with a sound like a gunshot, and suddenly she could breathe again. The brutal Wyoming sun hit her face like a physical blow, but somehow it felt cleaner than the darkness inside that shack. Out here, under the merciless sky, at least she could see what was coming. She hurried down the dusty main road, pulling her threadbare shawl tight despite the heat that had to be pushing 90 degrees. Modesty demanded covering, even in summer, even in poverty. Gravel Bend was exactly what its name suggested. Hard, gray, and bent out of shape by forces beyond anyone's control. Miners with dead eyes watched her pass from the shade of the Lucky Strike saloon. She'd learned to make herself invisible, to become nothing more than a shadow slipping through the world, unnoticed and unremarkable. It was safer that way. Whitmore's trading post sat in the center of what passed for civilization in Gravel Bend, its false front promising prosperity that had never arrived and never would. The bell above the door jangled as Mercy entered, announcing her presence to the handful of customers inside. The relative coolness was a brief mercy, a moment's respite from the brutal heat outside. Samuel Whitmore stood behind his counter, weighing flour in paper sacks with his brass scale, his hands shaking slightly from too many years of hard living and harder winters. He was 60 if he was a day, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering and hands that remembered gentler work. When he saw Mercy's face, the fresh bruise blooming purple on her cheekbone, the split lip she'd tried to hide, something like pity crossed his weathered features. "Afternoon, Miss Dalton." He couldn't quite meet her eyes, couldn't quite face the evidence of what everyone in town knew, but no one would stop. "Your mother sent you?" "Yes, sir. She said you might have work available. Stockroom organization, maybe. Or sweeping. Or inventory counting." The words came out in a rush, desperate and eager. Whitmore's expression told her everything before he spoke, and Mercy felt her stomach drop. Business has been terrible slow since the Thompson mine shut down last month. Half the town's already packed up and left. I don't have anything today, child. I'm truly sorry." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath Mercy's feet. No work meant no money. No money meant going home empty-handed. Going home empty-handed meant... She couldn't even finish the thought. Her hands started trembling, the familiar panic rising in her throat like bile. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, anything. I can organize your storeroom, I can sweep, I can clean the windows, I can work for just pennies. Please." "Mercy." His voice was gentle but final, the voice of a good man forced to make hard choices by harder circumstances. He pulled a single silver dollar from his cash box and set it on the counter with a soft clink. "Take this. But you didn't hear it from me. I can't have Ruth storming in here again like last time, breaking things and screaming. I'm sorry, child. I truly am." $1. Ruth needed 2. A bottle of rye whiskey cost $1.50. The math was simple, brutal, and terrifying. Mercy reached for the coin with shaking fingers, knowing it wouldn't be enough, knowing what awaited her at home. And that's when the light in the store changed. Someone had entered. Someone big. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the summer heat. The 2 miners who'd been browsing near the tool section went silent mid-conversation. Even the flies stopped buzzing their lazy circles. Mercy felt the presence before she turned around, the way animals sense an approaching storm or earthquake. Some primal instinct, screaming danger. Standing in the doorway, completely blocking out the sun and casting a shadow that seemed to swallow half the store, was a figure that belonged more to legend than reality. He stood well over 6 feet, had to be 6'4" at least, broad as an oak tree and twice as solid. He was wrapped in furs that looked like they'd been taken from animals that died, fighting. Bear skin, wolf pelt, elk hide all layered and weathered. His beard was thick and dark as midnight, his face weathered by wind and altitude, and years lived hard. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed eyes that Mercy couldn't see, but could definitely feel, boring into her like physical weight. This was Josiah Kane. They called him the Ghost of Timber Ridge. He came down from the high country only 3 times a year, and when he did, the whole town held its breath and waited for him to leave. The stories about him ranged from unlikely to impossible. Some said he'd killed 6 men in a range war down in Colorado Territory, standing alone against a lynch mob. Others swore he'd survived a grizzly bear attack that should have torn him to pieces, that he'd killed the bear with just a knife and his bare hands. A few claimed he'd been a cavalry scout during the Indian campaigns of the 60s, the kind who did things the government didn't want recorded in history books, the kind who came back from the frontier with blood on their hands and ice in their eyes. Mercy tried to slip past him toward the door, to escape before whatever dark energy surrounded this man somehow attached itself to her already cursed life. But her worn boot, the sole nearly separated from the leather, caught on a raised floorboard that Whitmore kept meaning to fix. She pitched forward, her hands reaching out instinctively to catch herself. She collided with Josiah Kane's arm. It was like hitting a granite wall. He didn't move even an inch, didn't shift his weight or step back, solid as the mountain he lived on. But Mercy bounced backward from the impact, landing hard on the floor. The breath knocked from her lungs. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd touched him. She'd invaded the space of the most dangerous man in 3 territories. Now he would hurt her. Men always hurt her when she made mistakes, when she stumbled, when she failed to be invisible enough. She squeezed her eyes shut, tucking her, head down, waiting for the blow, waiting for the kick or the slap or worse. It didn't come. Slowly, cautiously, she opened her eyes. Josiah Kane was looking down at her. For the first time, she could see his face clearly beneath the shadow of his hat. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale gray and piercing, the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything, that missed nothing. They swept over her methodically, her torn dress, her bleeding hands, the bruise darkening her cheekbone that she'd tried to hide with her hair, the split lip, the way she held herself small and defensive. His gaze was so intense, it felt like he could see straight through to her bones, to the fear that lived in her marrow, to the 19 years of accumulated damage that she carried like stones in her pockets. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the store into frozen silence. He extended his hand, not to strike, but to help. Not closed in a fist, but open, palm up, waiting. The hand was massive, scarred across the knuckles from fights or work or both. The hand of someone who'd built a life with violence and survival and sheer stubbornness. Calluses covered the palm, thick as leather. But it was offered palm up, in invitation, in assistance. Mercy stared at it like it was a coiled rattlesnake, dangerous and unpredictable. Slowly, trembling, not quite believing what she was seeing, she placed her small, damaged hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers, carefully, like he was aware of his own strength and her fragility. Then he pulled her to her feet with such effortless ease, she might have weighed nothing at all. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, rusty from disuse. Josiah's eyes never left her face. He studied her for another long moment, then released her hand and turned back to Whitmore. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder rolling through canyons, deep and Rarely heard, but impossible to ignore. "Who is she, Whitmore?" Swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. That's Mercy Dalton. Ruth Dalton's girl from out on Bone Creek Road." Something changed in Josiah's expression. Not quite anger, not quite recognition. Something darker, colder, more dangerous. He looked back at Mercy, and she felt like he was reading a story written on her skin in bruises and scars, reading her whole miserable history in one long look. "Where do you live?" The question was direct, unavoidable, commanding. The shack on Bone Creek Road, the one with the broken chimney and the leaning porch. She didn't know why she was answering. She should run, should flee, should get as far from this dangerous man as possible. But something in his voice made lying impossible, made evasion unthinkable. Josiah turned back to his bundle of furs, expensive pelts from beaver and mink and silver fox, the kind that would fetch top dollar in Denver or San Francisco. He pushed the entire sack toward Whitmore. "Store credit." Of course, Josiah. Of course." Whitmore's hand shook as he examined the furs. That's nearly $200 worth of prime pelts here. Top quality. What do you need? Ammunition? Supplies for the winter? Coffee? Salt? No. Josiah's gaze swung back to Mercy, and she felt pinned by those winter sky eyes. "I need an introduction." The words hung in the air like gun smoke after a shot. Whitmore's face went pale. The two miners exchanged nervous glances and quietly edged toward the door. Everyone in the store understood what was happening, even if they couldn't quite believe it. An introduction?" Whitmore stammered. "To who?" Josiah pointed one thick, scarred finger directly at Mercy. "To her mother." Mercy felt her stomach turn to ice, felt her heart start hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Why would this mountain legend want to meet Ruth Dalton? What business could he possibly have with a bitter, violent drunk? Nothing good came from men wanting to meet her mother. Nothing good ever came from anything involving Ruth. "I don't think," Mercy started, but Josiah was already walking toward the door, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. He stopped at the threshold and looked back at her, those winter sky eyes unreadable, giving nothing away. "Show me." It wasn't a request. It was a command from someone who didn't make requests, who didn't ask permission, who simply acted and expected the world to adjust accordingly. And somehow, impossibly, Mercy found her feet moving toward him. She walked past him into the blazing afternoon sun, and the ghost of Timber Ridge fell into step behind her, his presence like a wall at her back. As they headed toward Bone Creek Road, toward the woman who'd spent 19 years teaching Mercy that she was worthless and unlovable and better off dead, Mercy had one terrifying thought that wouldn't leave her mind. Either this man was going to save her life, or he was about to make it. Infinitely worse. She couldn't decide which possibility scared her more. The walk to the shack felt like a death march, every step heavier than the last. Mercy's legs moved mechanically, but her mind was racing through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Behind her, Josiah's footsteps were eerily silent for such a large man, barely disturbing the dust of Bone Creek Road. Twice she glanced over her shoulder, and both times found him watching her with that unsettling intensity, those pale gray eyes missing nothing. The shack came into view, leaning slightly to one side, as if even the building wanted to escape. Its windows were like empty eye sockets, staring out at nothing. Mercy's hands started to shake. She stopped 10 feet from the door, unable to force herself any closer. "She's not well," Mercy said quietly, desperately trying to warn him of what awaited inside. She's got a terrible temper, and she's been drinking since this morning. She's dangerous when Josiah moved past her without acknowledging the warning. He walked straight to the door and knocked 3 times, heavy thuds that shook the frame and sent dust sifting from the eaves. From inside came a string of curses that would make a miner blush. Then Ruth's voice, sharp and angry as broken glass. "What in damnation?" The door flew open. Ruth stood there, fire poker gripped in one white-knuckled hand, her face twisted with anticipation of violence. Then she saw Josiah, and the poker lowered slightly, wavering. Even in her gin-soaked state, Ruth Dalton recognized genuine danger when it filled her doorway, blocking out the sun. "Who the hell are you?" Ruth demanded, though her voice had lost some of its venom, replaced by uncertainty. "My name is Josiah Kane." His voice carried that same quiet thunder, the sound of distant storms. "I've come to discuss business." Ruth's bloodshot eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What kind of business would I have with a mountain hermit? I don't owe you money. The kind involving your daughter." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ruth's gaze snapped to where Mercy stood in the yard, and pure malice flooded her yellowed features. "What lies have you been telling, you worthless little—" "I've told him nothing, Mama," Mercy said quickly, desperately, her voice rising in pitch. "I swear it. I don't know what he wants." "May I enter?" Josiah asked, though the question didn't sound like a question at all. Ruth hesitated, some animal instinct warning her that inviting this man inside might be the last decision she ever made. But curiosity and greed won out over caution, the way they always did. She stepped aside. "Make it quick." Josiah had to duck to get through the doorway, his massive frame barely fitting through the opening. Once inside, he surveyed the interior with those calculating eyes, taking in the squalor. The overturned furniture, the empty gin bottles lined up like soldiers against one wall, the dark stain on the floor where blood had been scrubbed but not quite removed. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sit," Josiah said, gesturing to the rocking chair. Ruth's face flushed an angry red. "You don't give orders in my house, you son of a—" Josiah's hand moved to his belt, where a Bowie knife the size of a small sword hung in a leather sheath. He didn't draw it. He just let his hand rest there, fingers curling around the grip. The threat was unmistakable. Ruth's protests died in her throat. She sat. Mercy remained frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. What was happening? What did this man want? Josiah reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, heavy and substantial. He tossed it onto the rickety table. It landed with the unmistakable clink of coins. Gold coins. $300, Josiah said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Enough to buy this shack 10 times over. Enough to buy whiskey until your liver finally gives out and you meet whatever judgment awaits you. Enough to leave this dying town and start somewhere new. Ruth's eyes went wide, her tongue darting out to wet her cracked lips. $300 was more money than most people in Gravel Bend saw in 5 years of hard labor. It was a fortune. Her gnarled fingers twitched, reaching toward the bag. For what? For her. Josiah pointed at Mercy without looking at her, his finger steady as a gun barrel. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Mercy couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had tilted sideways, and nothing made sense anymore. He wanted to buy her? Like property? Like livestock? "You want to buy my daughter?" Ruth's voice was calculating now, sly and greedy. The voice she used when she thought she could squeeze more money out of a situation. She stood up and walked to the table, unable to resist touching the pouch, feeling its weight. "For what purpose?" "That's not your concern," Josiah replied coldly. $300. She leaves with me. You never see her again. You never speak her name. She ceases to exist in your world, and you cease to exist in hers. Simple transaction. Ruth picked up the pouch, testing its weight, her mind visibly calculating. Mercy watched her mother's face, waiting for some sign of hesitation, some flicker of maternal feeling, some indication that 19 years meant something. There was nothing. Just greed and cold calculation, the arithmetic of abandonment. $500, Ruth said, her voice hardening with renewed confidence. Josiah didn't blink, didn't flinch. $350. Final offer. Take it or I walk, and you can explain to the girl why you turned down a fortune. Ruth considered this for exactly 3 seconds, counting on her fingers, calculating what $350 would buy in terms of gin and escape. Done. The word fell like an axe. Mercy felt something deep inside her shatter, the speed of it, the ease. Her mother had just sold her, to a complete stranger, for the price of a decent horse. And the negotiation had taken less time than buying flour at Whitmore's. There had been no hesitation, no questions about where Mercy would go or what would happen to her. Just cold, hard commerce. Josiah pulled out another, smaller pouch from inside his coat. He emptied both onto the table. Gold coins scattered across the scarred wood, glinting in the dim light that filtered through the grimy windows. Double eagles and half eagles, each one worth real money. Ruth's hands were already reaching for them, greedy and shaking with eagerness. "There's one condition," Josiah said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous, something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "If I ever see you near her again, if you ever try to contact her, if you even speak her name in public, I will come back down from that mountain. And next time, I won't bring gold." His hand moved to the knife again, this time his fingers, wrapped around the handle, and Ruth saw her own death reflected in those cold, gray eyes. Whatever bravado the gin had given her evaporated instantly. She nodded quickly, jerkily, unable to speak through her fear. Josiah turned to Mercy. "Gather your belongings. Whatever you want to keep. You have 5 minutes." Mercy stood frozen, her mind unable to process what was happening, unable to move forward or backward. Where are we going?" "Away from here," Josiah said, and for the first time, something that might have been gentleness entered his voice. "Do you want to stay?" It was the same question he'd asked without words back at the trading post, a choice disguised as a command. Stay with the woman who'd spent 19 years teaching her she was worthless, or leave with a stranger who might be worse. But how could anything be worse than this? Mercy ran to her corner of the room, nothing more than a pile of rags on bare floor that served as her bed. She grabbed the only things that mattered. Her father's old pocket watch, stopped at 2:47 on the day he died, a small leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her grandmother, and a dress that wasn't quite as torn as the one she was wearing. It took less than 2 minutes. Her entire life, everything she'd ever owned or cared about, fit in a bundle she could carry under one arm. When she returned to the main room, Ruth was counting the coins, her lips moving silently, her eyes glittering with manic joy. She didn't look up as Mercy passed, didn't say goodbye, didn't acknowledge her daughter's existence for what would be the last time. She'd already moved on, already forgotten, already spent the money in her mind. Josiah held the door open. Mercy stepped through it and heard it close behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of a chapter, the closing of a book on 19 years of misery. Outside, a wagon waited that she hadn't noticed before, pulled by two massive draft horses that looked strong enough to pull a house. Josiah gestured to the seat. Mercy climbed up with shaking legs, nearly falling twice. Josiah swung up beside her with practiced ease, taking the reins in those large, scarred hands. He made a soft, clicking sound with his tongue, and the horses began to move, their massive hooves stirring up dust as they turned north. They left Bone Creek Road behind, left the shack that had never been a home, left Ruth Dalton and her poison and her violence to rot alone with her gold. As they reached the edge of town, heading not west toward whatever passed for civilization, but north toward the mountains, toward those distant peaks that seemed to touch the sky, Mercy finally found her voice. "What are you going to do with me?" Josiah kept his eyes on the trail ahead, his expression unreadable. The wagon was climbing now, the air growing thinner and cooler with each turn of the wheels. When he finally spoke, his answer was not what she expected. "Teach you that you're not what she told. You!" Mercy turned to look at him. This mountain ghost. This stranger who just paid a fortune for a girl he'd met an hour ago. Why? For the first time, something like emotion flickered across Josiah's weathered face. Pain, old and deep, and still raw. "Because 3 years ago I couldn't save someone who needed saving, and I won't make that mistake twice." The wagon climbed higher. Gravel Bend disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and the gathering dusk. Ahead, the peaks of Timber Ridge rose like ancient teeth against the darkening sky, sharp and forbidding and impossibly remote. Mercy pulled the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and realized something strange. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. She had no idea what waited for her in those mountains, but it couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The ghost of Timber Ridge guided his horses toward home, and Mercy Dalton rode beside him into the unknown, carrying everything she owned and nothing she would miss. They climbed for 5 hours. The temperature plummeted. Josiah handed her a wool blanket without a word. "How much further?" "Another hour. Then we walk." The trail became impossible. When Mercy twisted her ankle, Josiah carried her the last mile. For the first time in years, despite the cold and fear, she felt safe. The cabin appeared, a fortress of massive logs with glass windows and a smoking chimney. Inside was warm, clean, organized. Shelves lined with hundreds of books, actual civilization. "That room is yours. It has a lock on the inside. Use it." Mercy touched the bolt wonderingly. "You put a lock on the inside?" "I'm not your mother, and I'm not a jailer." He served stew. Mercy stood by the wall waiting. "What are you doing?" Josiah asked. "Waiting for you to finish." "Sit. Eat. This is not negotiable." She ate, crying silently, tasting real food for the first time in memory. "I sleep in the loft. You lock your door. No one comes in unless you open it. Not even me." That night, Mercy slid the bolt home. For the first time ever, she was locked in but felt free. 3 weeks passed. Mercy cooked, cleaned, and read. Josiah was a ghost in his own home, leaving before dawn, returning after dark. But the silence was companionable, not angry. The mystery of the clothes she wore burned inside her. One evening during a blizzard, she finally asked, "Who is Clara?" Josiah's knife slipped. "Where did you hear that name?" "Stitched in the dress collar. And the locket. She was my wife. She died 5 years ago. Smallpox took her and our daughter Emily." Mercy's hand flew to her mouth. "I was a lawyer in Boston. When sickness came, money didn't matter. I couldn't save them. I burned the house and walked west until I found a place where no one could find me." He looked broken. "I saw you in that store. You looked like her. Not the face, but the spirit. Broken, but trying to stand. I couldn't leave you there." Suddenly, the dog outside yelped. Then silence. Josiah grabbed his rifle. "Get in your room. Lock the door. Don't come out." Heavy thudding on the door. "Open up! We know you're in there, Captain Alistair Thorne. We have a warrant for murder of General Higgins in 65! Mercy froze. "Captain? Come and get me!" Josiah roared. The door exploded inward. Mercy dove under the bed as gunfire shattered the night. The cabin erupted in chaos. Winchester fire, splintering wood, men screaming. Through the dust ruffle, Mercy saw flashes, blood spreading on the rugs. Then she saw a man raising a revolver at Josiah's back. She wouldn't watch another person she cared about die. Mercy grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove, burning her palm. She ran out, screaming. The man turned. Josiah charged, slamming him into the wall. The fight was brutal and short. Finally, silence except for Josiah's ragged breathing. He turned to Mercy, blood-covered. "You came out! I told you to stay!" "You needed help." He looked at the skillet, then smiled, his first real smile. "Elizabeth would have liked you." Over 6 weeks, Mercy transformed. Daily runs, weapons training, knife work. She learned to shoot, to fight, to survive. Josiah taught her that strength wasn't about feeling strong. It was about surviving when you wanted to give up. But on the 4th week, 3 men appeared while Josiah was checking trap lines. Mercy grabbed the Winchester. The scarred leader called out threats. Mercy stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. "Josiah Kane isn't here. You're trespassing." "Leave." They laughed. "You gonna shoot all 3? "Just him. At this range, I won't miss." The scarred man studied her. He saw someone who'd decided to pull the trigger. "When's Kane coming back?" "He's not." They retreated, threatening to return with more men. When Josiah returned, Mercy told him everything. "They'll come back. We need to leave." "No," Mercy said firmly. "You've been running 3 years. How much, oh? Longer? I won't let you die for me. When they come back, they'll find out the ghost of Timber Ridge isn't alone anymore." Josiah smiled. "All right. We stay. We fight." The attack came on the 4th night. 6 men, maybe more. They tried to burn them out. But Josiah did something unexpected. He stepped outside, hands visible. "Let's settle this like men. You and me. These mountains. No guns. If I lose, you leave the girl alone." "We take the girl as insurance," the scarred man said. Mercy stepped out. "No. I have a better idea." She bluffed about documentation, about proof that would be released if they died. "You get to go home saying you completed your mission without bloodshed. Everyone wins." Josiah caught on. "I have journals. 3 years proving I'm no threat. Take them. Show your superiors I'm neutralized." The scarred man weighed his options. Return with proof or corpses and questions. "Get the journals." Josiah handed over his 3 leather-bound books. The scarred man flipped through them. Nothing dangerous, just a hermit's observations. "We'll take these. But Kane, if we hear your name again, we won't negotiate." They disappeared into darkness. "That was either brilliant or the worst decision," Josiah said. "They'll report you're neutralized. It's what they wanted to hear." "How did you know?" "You taught me survival isn't just strength. It's being smart. We gave them an out." Josiah pulled her into a fierce hug. "You saved both our lives." Winter arrived early. Snow buried the cabin to the windows. Josiah taught Mercy to read the advanced books, to play chess, to think strategically. She taught him that laughter wasn't betrayal of the dead. They established routines: morning coffee watching the sunrise, evening reading by the fire, comfortable silences between two people who understood survival. One night, Mercy asked, "Do you ever regret bringing me here?" "Not once." "You?" She looked at the warm cabin, the books, the man who'd given her a life. "Never." When spring came, they worked the land together, planting vegetables, repairing winter damage, hunting fresh meat. Mercy had become strong, capable, confident. A traitor stumbled upon them, lost and freezing. They nursed him back to health, fed him, sent him on with supplies. "You seem happy," the traitor observed. "We found what we were looking for," Mercy replied, "even though we didn't know we were looking." Once a season, Josiah made the trip to Whitmore's for supplies. The second spring, Mercy insisted on going. Gravel Bend looked smaller, grayer, sadder. Whitmore's face lit up seeing her healthy and strong. "Mercy, you look alive." "I am alive, for the first time. Your mother died 6 months ago, drank herself to death." Mercy felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just nothing. "She died alone with all that gold," Whitmore added sadly. Mercy squeezed Josiah's hand. "Some people choose their fate." That night, sitting by the fire, Josiah spoke carefully. "I've been thinking about making this official." "Official? You're not property. You're not a ward. You're—" He struggled. "Your family. I want to adopt you legally. Make sure if anything happens to me, this land is yours. No one can take it." Mercy's eyes filled. "Family. If you'll have an old hermit as a father figure." She threw her arms around him. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They expanded the cabin, adding a workshop for Mercy's leatherworking. She discovered a talent for crafting beautiful, functional pieces they could trade. Josiah taught her advanced survival skills: how to track, how to hunt, how to read weather patterns. She taught him to let joy back into his life. They weren't romantic. They were something deeper. Two survivors who'd built a family from ashes. 2 years after the attack, a different soldier appeared. Older, with kind eyes, and officer's insignia. "Captain Thorne, I'm Colonel Mitchell. I served with you in Tennessee." Josiah's hand moved to his knife. "I'm not here for that. I'm here because Higgins's crimes finally came to light. The government is quietly pardoning officers who refused his orders. You're a free man, Captain. The warrant is void." Josiah stood frozen. "Why now?" "Because justice is slow, but it eventually arrives. I wanted you to know. What you did was right. History will remember you correctly." After he left, Mercy found Josiah crying. "It's over. I'm free." "You were always free," she said. "Up here, you were always free." The traitor's story spread. People whispered about the ghost of Timber Ridge and the woman who tamed him, though Mercy would laugh at that. She hadn't tamed anyone. They'd saved each other. Whitmore sent supplies with a note. "Town's dying. Everyone's leaving. Just wanted you to know. You two are the only success story to come out of Gravel Bend. Live well." They did. They lived fully, freely, joyfully, teaching each other, growing together, building something beautiful from tragedy. The trader who'd stumbled upon their cabin years ago told his story in every town, about a man and woman who'd found peace at the roof of the world. "They seemed happy," he said, "like they'd found exactly what they were looking for." In that mountain cabin, Mercy and Josiah sat by their fire, reading books they'd read a dozen times, comfortable in the silence of two people who didn't need words. Outside, the first snow of another winter began to fall. The ghost of Timber Ridge had finally stopped haunting himself. The The girl who learned to become iron discovered she could also be soft. Not romantic love, though time would tell, but the deeper love of two survivors who pulled each other from separate hells and built something beautiful from the ashes. That's where legends end and life begins. In a place where ghosts became human again and broken things learned to be whole. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more tales from the American frontier. Comment below and tell me what story you want to hear next. Should we explore a railroad revenge tale, a gold rush mystery, or something else entirely? Until then, remember, sometimes salvation comes from the last place you'd expect, and sometimes the strongest among us are the ones who learned to survive the unsurvivable. Thanks for watching.